Before we start, I think it's important to acknowledge we had our wardrobe change, didn't we?
We did have our wardrobe changed. We sure did.
Or why did you decide to take off the sweatshirt?
I decided to take off the sweatshirt because one of the most important things that I have come to realize about my existence, especially in the corporate world, is that visibility of people that look like me matters. And it's been particularly confirmed in my latest role. So I'm almost into month 3 of a new role as the VP, Vice President and Director of Growth Marketing at Penguin Random House. And which is an incredible opportunity. And we can get into why in the world I went back into corporate after I left it in a blaze of glory. But one of the things that has happened, even in the short time that I've been there, is I have gotten multiple messages from folks, even at an organization that is as inclusive, as diverse, as equitable as PRH, saying, oh my God, seeing you and how you show up and how you present and how you look, let me know there's a space for me here. Let me know that I can do things here. Let me know that I can advance. And so as we started talking, I was looking at my own self view, which, God, I hate looking at my own self view in Zoom. I'm like, it's distracting, but I realized, no, I need to be visible, because that is honestly, when it comes to the corporate space, one of my greatest superpowers is showing up authentically and giving folks that agency of authenticity to be like, I exist here. You can exist here too. My existence in this corporate space is neither hampered nor predicated by the fact that I look how I look. And which is, by the way, I think it's lovely and it's my choice and I love how I look, but it's often been a detriment. And so, yeah, as soon as I saw my self view, I'm like, you know what? Nope. We're gonna flash the guns. We're gonna flash the chest hat. We're going to do this because it's important for people to see that if you look like me, you can exist in a corporate space, and not just at the lower levels. You can exist at the executive level and be valued and seen as a valuable contributor to that executive level. So yeah, we had a wardrobe change.
I love it. I love it. Just very impromptu. And, it's interesting because I was very intentional when I launched this podcast to put a face and a name to a lot of these stories and experiences, because I was so tired of, like, you would see these like research studies, for example, and it says Latina VP says that she received microaggression, or Latina VP. And it's always like, I'm like, who is that Latina VP? Who is that anonymous person that they're quoting in these articles? Like, I felt that it was so important to put that representation to be very visible. I mean, all of the workplace experiences, if you think about it, at least in my experience, either go untold, or where they are told, they're told anonymously, right? It always says anonymous employee or on Glassdoor, right? So I appreciate you just being very intentional about how you want to, show up. And that brings us into like the first question that I always ask, around authenticity, right? When we first think about it, I think many people think about it as the visual, but there's so many facets of us that go into it, right? So, and it's also just such a buzzword these days. Like, what the hell does it mean to you? Like, what comes to mind when you hear that word?
Holy crap. That is equal parts one of my favorite questions. I was just asked this recently. I'm like, ooh, but also it's such a layered questions. It's kind of like ogres and onions. It has layers. To me, authenticity is showing up as yourself without. You can still show up as yourself with fear, but you show up as yourself without reservation. So, because it's scary to show up as yourself, it's terrifying to show up as yourself. Even if you are part of the accepted, norm, it can be really scary to show up as yourself. But to be authentic is to embrace yourself fully and show up as yourself, knowing that by doing so, you're doing two things. Number one, you are essentially telling people, if you can't take my heat, get out of my kitchen. And not in a bad way, but it's like, you get me. It's what you get. And you will get this from me no matter what. So you can expect this from me 100% of the time, 10 out of 10. This is me. But on the other side is also giving, and I just mentioned this, but to me, being an age, it's not enough to show up authentically. The next part is that agency of authenticity, which is you are actually giving others permission to do the same. And you show up authentically, and it's showing up as yourself, knowing that you are giving permission to other people to do the same, knowing that you are giving a voice to other people that either look like you, act like you, feel like you. I am Latina, I am queer, I am tattooed, I have purple hair, I am neurodivergent. I live in the intersection of so many things. And that comes with some privileges, but it mostly comes with disadvantages. But when I show up authentically, I can not only call attention to the disadvantages, I can enhance the privileges, and then I can make space for others to live in that authenticity with me. And that is, to me, the greatest gift of authenticity, and the greatest value of authenticity is that ability to, you show up and authenticity expands with you. Like you make room by doing that. And it's why the wardrobe changed, right? It's why, because I'm like, okay, guys, hey, look at me. I exist in this space. You can too, because I am making that space for you, and you can make that space for yourself and others.
Well, and thank you for sharing that. And it's funny because someone asked me the other day, was like, why did you choose the word professionalism? Like, why did you want to redefine professionalism? And I said that professionalism, and same with executive presence, they're very generic phrases that people throw out,
Mhm.
and they don't really have a meaning behind it, or like they don't, well, they do actually have meaning behind it, but they don't use the actual meaning. They have this perception on what it is, right? And they're able to like exclude people from it based on their own perception, right? But it's interesting, like you said, so many powerful things in that explanation of authenticity. One I thought was really powerful was this permission to be yourself. Tell me about you growing up. Did you feel early on like you had permission to be yourself?
No. No. I really, really didn't. And it happened in retrospect, like thanks therapy, but in retrospect, thanks therapy. But in retrospect, I realized that I never really felt I had permission to exist as myself until very, very, very recently.
Mhm.
And I'm talking like last 3 years recently.
Wow.
Right. And I'm 41. Right. So it's been my whole life. So no, I never really did. I think so. A couple of things that will help put this into context. So I grew up in Guatemala. I was
Mhm.
born and raised in Guatemala. So I lived there until I was 18. So right there. And so again, let's call a spade a spade. Guatemala in the 80s and 90s, and even before 1980s, 1990s, for everybody who's really, really young and thinking that I'm really, really old, in the late 20th century. But in general, Guatemala is a very patriarchal society. It is not particularly inclusive or embracive. It's certainly not of queer folk, but women, I mean, face a tremendous uphill battle there. And so even just growing up there as a girl, as a female identifying person, was you have to you follow a very specific set of social mores and norms. So I never wanted to wear pants. I never wanted to wear dresses. I always wanted to wear pants. I wanted to have like weirdly colored hair. None of these things. And I did some of it, and none of those things were ever really accepted. I was always, my mother would say this thing, again, thanks therapy, I've realized how crappy this was. But my mother would say this thing whenever she would see me come out dressed like I wanted to be dressed, with like baggy pants or whatever it was. She'd go, "Oh, you look like you just stepped out of a magazine." And it's interesting because on the surface, you think that's a compliment. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. And it was because she was coming at it from a very specific point of view, a very Latina, old school. We're in Guatemala. Our
Yeah.
national religion is Catholicism, and we
Right.
say what we do what the men say. So even from that perspective, but I mean, no, I've never really felt that I was able to be authentic until very recently. I'll give you another example. In retrospect, again, I only came out a year ago as queer. Um, and but I have known again in retrospect that I have been gay for a very long time.
Mhm.
But I wasn't embracing that because I get it's a lack of authenticity. Like what's gonna happen at work? What's gonna happen happen with my friendships? What's going to happen to, I've been married to a man before. Is that going to invalidate who I am as like the levels and layers that come from all of that? So my authenticity has really only come to the forefront in the past 3 years. And it's taken a wild turn, because in those 3 years or 5 years, I have essentially come out. I have a trans non-binary partner. I've gotten my tattoos. I have my purple hair. I have my piercings. I have all the things. And it's because all of a sudden I felt empowered to be able to do these things, but it took me almost 40 years to get there. And I don't really, like, my deepest hope is that, like, what I want is that nobody else has to go through that. Like, withholding yourself from authenticity for that long. Oh my God. In retrospect, I'm like, how did I even pull it off? How did I survive? Like, how did I do that? Right? It's a big deal. Like, it's, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
tell me about, it sounds like there were a few moments potentially, or maybe a moment very recently where you were just like, you know what, fuck it. I'm gonna start being myself. I'm gonna stop faking it. What was it for you that gave you that empowered feeling that you mentioned?
You know what's so funny? It was the pandemic.
Not
It
funny.
was
It happens to a lot of people. It's a
it
reckoning moment.
it was a reckoning. It was a reckoning. And I think, interestingly for me, what it was is we were all sent home right at the beginning of 2020. And all of a sudden, what happened? We weren't around other people anymore. Like, for a long time, we weren't around other people, 6, 9 months. Like, I know that for the most part, I didn't really leave my house for 2020. Like, I just didn't. Like, once I started, I was kind of like, okay, we're here forever. This is our new future. This is our Hunger Games. We, we are now in the house for eternity. But for me, what that almost lent was oh, I don't have to dress a certain way anymore. Nobody sees me from the waist up, from the waist down on Zoom. Like, I don't have to be wearing like heels, pants like that are fancy. I don't even have to be wearing a nice shirt. And that was kind of the beginning of it. I was like, I don't have to play pretend. I don't have to be on. I don't have to find ways to fit. I don't have to. What people need from me right now is to show up, be supportive, lead a team, and keep shit together. That's what they need from me. It doesn't matter how I look. It doesn't matter how I dress. It doesn't matter. It almost doesn't even matter how I talk, as long as what I am doing and talking and saying is rallying people together, bringing them together, acting like the psychological safety net that we all need right now. And from there, it was kind of it was almost like a downward spiral. Sounds negative, but it was almost like an unraveling of sorts, where I'm like, oh, why do I have to why do I have to wear shoes when I work? Like, what, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was almost like, I don't have to do any of these things. I can be comfortable in myself and be massively successful at doing that. And all of these things were just trappings. They were trappings of but they were trappings. Like, why do I need to wear makeup? Who is it actually benefiting? It's not benefiting me. It takes 20 minutes of my morning every day. I mean, if you love it, wear it. Like, if it's your vibe, do it. If your vibe is suits, do it. I've had people who tell me, no, but I feel good in suits. Then fucking do it. Like, what I am saying is, when you find yourself doing things because you feel like you will be taken more seriously if you do, or you will be taken, or you will be respected more if you do, or if you will, like, if it's for anything other than I feel comfortable, then you stop doing it. Stop doing it immediately, because it is not serving you, it is serving others. And typically what it is serving is a fucked up power structure. So and it was, and the pandemic kind of brought that to a forefront, because I was at the time leading, I had literally almost at the beginning of the pandemic, I got promoted to VP of marketing and acting CMO at the organization I was at. And my role became holding things together with both hands. It didn't, like, I was immediately having to, so I was new in a role. We were going through like a merger of teams. So it was this whole like amalgam of things. And my role became hold things together with both hands, keep people from leaving, hold them close, walk them through basically the destruction of the world as we knew it, who the hell cares if I wore a tank top to a Zoom meeting? Are people okay?
Yeah.
Right? Like, are people fine? And that's what it showed me, is like, it did, in fact, what I found is that by me showing up authentically, vulnerably, like transparently, what that did was that it broke down all of the barriers of quote unquote what most would call professionalism. And what it built was a team.
Yeah.
It built a team because we lost the trappings of expected power structures and professionalism. We were
Yeah.
just now one on one, and we didn't have to work within anything else. And yeah, it was just the pandemic. It kind of took a giant bazooka and blew it up for me. And I'm like, okay. And now I don't ever show up to anything other than feeling comfortable. And you know what I have found? I've actually done better.
Of
I
course.
am like, I've
Of
done
course.
better. But it's like, I think it's worth for people to hear this, because it's like,
Yeah.
you will do better when you show up as yourself in your most comfortable, authentic way, because at that point, the people that bring you in and surround you and hold you close are the people who are embracing you at your whole self. And you never have to worry, if I show up as myself, or if they find out this thing about me, what's going to happen? You don't have to worry. And so you're able to do your best work, your most unencumbered work. You're able to be authentic for your teams, hold them close, grow them, love them, be with them in a way that would be unprofessional otherwise.
Yeah.
you know?
Well, something important that you mentioned was, and I think a lot of people don't quantify this because we do it so like unconsciously. Like it's just part of our everyday routine where we don't stop and think like, oh shit, no, this is a time commitment, right? Like I don't think we often calculate the opportunity cost that comes with assimilation, code switching, whatever you want to call it, right? For
Uh-huh.
example, when I was deep into it, I would legit dedicate hours out of my week to study white popular American culture. So you brought up an interesting point around, there's nothing wrong with expanding your preferences. For example, like Seinfeld, I love Seinfeld. Like The
Right.
Office, love The Office. I got put onto that somewhat by coworkers, right? But that's me finding out about something new, testing it, seeing if I like it, deciding if I want to continue. I like it, let me keep watching it. But other times, I didn't like the show and I watched it and binge watched seasons of it, right? Just to be able to feel relatable when someone brings it up at work, right? But that's a time commitment. Imagine very simply, if instead of binge watching a show I didn't care about, I was actually doing a work that would help me get promoted. You know what I mean? And and
Mm-hmm.
and that's a big thing that I think people don't often think about. Like, tell me about, for you, it sounds like whether you were thinking about it or not, you were wasting time, right? And you brought up a few like funny examples that I'm laughing about now, but at the time were probably not that funny, right? Like traditionally feminine things, right? Like makeup, you wore heels. Like, did you
Mm-hmm.
do your hair a certain way? Like, tell me about, to what extent were you like assimilating in corporate?
So many ways, so many ways. So I was spending, so all right, let's just go through like the personal, what I call personal maintenance, right? And keep in mind, I'll tell you who I am as an actual human being. Like, I am a person who hates showering. Like, I just do. Like, I'm the Brad Pitt. I'm the Brad Pitt
What?
of corporate, because it's a waste of time. I love how I feel after I'm clean, but to me, showering is a gigantic waste of time. I'm like, oh my God, can we just Jetsons this? Like, I wish that I could just walk through a door, wrong, clean, done, right? So this is, all right, so, but keep that in mind, right? I'm the person who hates showering, hates brushing their teeth, but will do it because cavities, like, but here I am every morning showering, doing my hair. My hair is much shorter now, and I like, but it used to be down to my waist. And so
Really?
yes. And so I had to like dry it, and it wasn't the kind that would dry nicely. So I had to like work at it, right? So here I am showering every morning, hate showering, drying my hair, like straightening it, doing all the things, 20, 30 minutes. So shower, 15 minutes, hair, 20 to 30 minutes, makeup, 10 to 15, picking out outfits. By the way, I am one of the most unstylish people you have ever seen in your life. My style, when I feel really comfortable, it's like Sandra Bullock and While You Were Sleeping. So it's like really baggy jackets, like kind of ratty t-shirts, sweatpants, and shoes that don't match. That's where I am. It works for me. It
Hey,
works for
whatever you
me.
like. Yeah,
But here I am analyzing, like on Instagram, being like, all right, what looks good? All right, oh, cute little
yeah.
jackets. All right, where do I buy that? Okay, I don't know how to wear that. All right, skinny jeans. I should wear skinny jeans. Okay, what goes with skinny jeans? Heels, what color heels? Booties. I don't like heels, so maybe booties. Like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And so now just in the mornings to get ready, we're talking an hour and 15 minutes. Multiply that by 52 work weeks. I can't do them. It's like what is it? 5 times 50, so
Yeah.
250 hours a year that I am sitting around putting on, and then add things like, oh, I should make it so that my eyes pop more, so let me go get fake eyelashes. Okay, so that is, so listen though, so now that's every 3 weeks, an hour in a chair getting eyelashes glued individually to my lashes, plus the money to pay for it, plus it just snowballs and skyrockets. And all for what? So that I would be taken seriously when I walked into a boardroom, because more often than not, I was the only brown female face in that boardroom. And so I had to be taken seriously. And the way that I needed to present to be taken seriously was by having the fake eyelashes, the makeup, the dress, the dress, blah, 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 blah,
Mhm.
bullshit. All of it to be taken seriously for what? At what does my brain wear eyelashes? Is that what makes it good? Do my ideas wear makeup? Is that what makes them powerful? Right? Does my contribution need high heels to be taken seriously? None of these things are true, but it's the visual input of what my output should be.
Do you think
It's
you were? Do you think you were taken seriously even with all of that?
no,
Tell me
no.
about that.
Well, there's something to be said when, and let's call a spade, there's something to be said when the men in the room feel like they can talk over you no matter what you look like or what you're saying.
Mhm.
There's something to be said. And most of the time I was the woman in the room. Now there have been exceptions to that, but most of the time as a woman in tech, I was usually the only woman in the room at an executive level. Um, and there's something to be said when people can just, and men and women will do this, but it's mostly men. They feel they can just talk right over you, verbally step right all over you. Like you want to pull a Maxine and be like, reclaim my time. I'd like to reclaim my time. But even if you did reclaim my time, they'll give you 30 seconds and then they'll keep talking. They're basically just waiting for you to finish talking so that they can continue their thought process. There's something to be said when you are the expert, the subject matter expert in a room saying a thing that is valuable, and then somebody interjects with saying, but I read a blog post that, bitch, please. Really? So no, I don't think I was. Sometimes I was. Like, let me preface this by saying there were definitely occasions in which I felt seen and I felt valued and I felt heard. But in the grand justice scale of things, they're much, like, it's light. That thing is light. And more often than not, to be completely honest, Barbara, I felt tokenized. Like, I felt like the reason I was in some of those rooms, the reason I had been elevated to certain spaces, the reason that I was because I provided a very nice visual for the rest of the masthead. And whether that's the case or not, that is very much how it felt. Because if I'm looking around and the only person who looks like me, talks like me, thinks like me is me, why aren't there more people like me? Oh, because I'm that person who's supposed to lend that to this particular group of individuals.
Yeah.
And so, no, like, I never, like, sometimes I did feel seen and taken seriously, but for the most part, no, definitely not.
Well, that was the thing for me, right? Because I was at this point, maybe it's very similar, but I was doing all of the like, the routines and the getting ready and the buying of the outfits. And I'm like, oh, if I do all this, then I'll be accepted. Right. And then I
Right.
had this moment, I was like, wait, but I'm still not. And then I was like, well, if I'm not, then I might as well be myself. maybe
Correct.
because like they're still going to treat me the same. I might as well not even try it. But then there's this, although there's a lot of like, there's like a liberating feeling during the pandemic of people just not giving a fuck.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean that there's not fear, right?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
you, for so long, as you mentioned, you were the only woman in the room. You were the only, insert many identities in that room. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So I love even the visual of this onion having so many layers being pulled back, right? And finally starting to reveal themselves. And I get this question often, it's like, well, how do I be myself? And I give people the advice, start with one thing at a time. Did you do it all at once? Like, what was it for you? Like, how did you start embracing authenticity when you were finally ready?
Oh, that's such a good question. So let me actually kind of recognize something that you said, because I think it's so worthwhile. So one of the things that I do, one of the ways in which I try to kind of bring about systemic change in a corporate space is I do leadership coaching. And
Mhm.
one of the things that I often tell my clients is exactly what you're saying, because they'll come to me and typically they bring me a very specific situation, like, oh, I'm having a hard time with this teammate and they're not doing this and I need to figure out how to say it. And so we'll figure out what's actually happening underneath. And and oftentimes it's okay, we're not giving directed feedback, or we're not, like, it'll be any number of things. And they're like, and I can see the tension kind of rise when I say, so you need to do this. And what I always say is exactly what you said is, okay, we're not going to jump right into having an entire 60-minute one-on-one with your teammate to tell them all the things that you think they're doing wrong. We're not going to do that, because it's you're going to freak out, you're going to pass out, and then we're going to get nowhere. So what you're going to do is you're going to practice saying one constructive thing in your next one-on-one, and it's going to feel scary. You're going to know that it's going to feel scary, and you're going to lean into that scary and recognize that feeling and honor it for what it is. And then the next time you're going to do it again, and it'll feel less scary. And the next time you're going to do it again, and it'll feel less scary. And eventually you do it so much that it just becomes second nature. And then you can add another piece of feedback. And then you can add another piece of feedback. And you do this incrementally so that eventually the fear is recognized, but it no longer hinders. You can still that's the other important thing to remember is it is rare the person that goes into authenticity without fear, and it is
Yeah.
rare the person that lives in authenticity without fear. I live in constant fear. It is just what happens. Like I may not recognize it anymore as fear. I recognize it as, oh, it's the thing that I feel whenever I'm doing something new. Ta-da. And I also eat a lot of CBD, so there's that. But it's just we do the things that we need to do to manage our anxiety, right? Like we do the things that need to do to manage our anxiety. But it's very much what you said. It's you just lean into the fear. You recognize it for what it is. You honor it. And what I tell folks is the fear is telling you that you're doing something significant. It's not telling you that you should stop. It's telling you that what you're doing is important enough to you that you feel scared about what happens if you do it, but also scared about what happens if you don't. So lean into that fear, recognize it, honor it, do the damn thing anyway. It's like riding a bike. You're going to fall down a lot, and eventually you're going to be cruising down the highway and it's going to be fine. So just do it. And it's important for people to recognize that, because for me, to answer your question, it's hard for me to actually remember what it was. I remember that for me, the first thing that I did that felt like I was leaning into myself and leaning into my authenticity was getting this sleeve tattoo. And originally, and in classic Anne fashion, I never do anything half-assed. I either do it like whole hog or I don't do it at all, right? So I originally had just like this like small tattoo here, this flower here. But I really wanted to have like what I thought was flowers all over my arm. And I went to see an artist for a consultation, and he's there and he's looking at my arm and he's like, well, I mean, what do you think about doing? I was like, maybe flowers, maybe birds. I don't know. What do you think? And he goes, you could just do a whole sleeve and like, and I'm like, yes, okay. Like it just, because it spoke to me, and I'm like, oh, all right. And then I said it, and he's like, okay, great. So, and he's not understanding that I am going through like layers of internal turmoil. I am literally having a mental break, a nervous conniption internally talking to this guy. He's like, okay, great. So let's book a time and a date. And I'm like, but I went through with it and I did it. And that was step one. And it took like, I think it was 3-4 months or something. Cause people are like, oh, is this a 6-month sitting? 6 hour sitting? I was like,
Oh
no,
no.
friends. No, friends.
Yeah.
This was 30 hours. This was 27. I have my whole back done. That took a year and a half. No, no, it's not like getting licked on by kittens, and it's not taking 3 hours. But
But
that
there's,
was go ahead.
well, I was gonna say, but there's getting the tattoo and then there's showing the tattoo, right? Because a lot of people, they
Right.
get the sleeve, but they wear jean jackets all day.
Correct. And so
Like,
that was a
then there's
step for
like,
me.
when do you wear the t-shirt to show off the hat? You know what I mean?
And absolutely correct. And so I got it, and I was so proud. And then I wore long sleeves for a year and a half or 2 years.
Yeah.
And then I went to, and so for a long time, I only had the one sleeve. Like
Mhm.
I got this sleeve when my son, I think, was 2, and he's 9 now. So 7 years ago was when I got this.
Yeah.
And 2, 1, whatever. Long enough that it was like, and then I was actually going through job interview processes, and it was in the middle of summer. And here I am with like long sleeves and like collared. And I even did, oh my God. So the other thing that I did was I had like my head, like half my head shaved. I don't know if you can tell, but I have like what I call a third of a head of hair, because I have 2
Mhm.
of my sides shaved, and I just have kind of like an overgrown mohawk at the top. And I literally, Bobby, for these job interviews, I was going in with my hair parted down the middle, and as best I could, like having it look like, yeah, like a bob. Because, which, can you imagine how ridiculous I must have looked? I thought I looked so good. I am there with long sleeves in the middle of summer with my what looked like probably very stringy hair on both sides of my face. Like, that made me like, do we want to talk about what unprofessional looks like? I should have just shown up how I looked. But I did all of that, to your point, because I was terrified. I was like, what are they going to think if I have head shave, sleeve tattoo? I'm never going to get the job. So I did get the job. And then after I got the job, was like, one day I woke up and I didn't have any long sleeve clean shirts. And I'm like, oh my God. I was like, and all of them smelled terribly, because again, it was the middle of summer and I'd been sweating through all of them. So I couldn't even grab a dirty one. So I'm like, it's like, okay, here we go. Like, here we go. And I wore a t-shirt and I just showed up to work, and it was fine. And I'm like, okay. I was
And
like,
what,
this is
yeah.
fine.
So like, how
It,
were you received? Did anyone say anything? Was it just
Nobody's,
you, your own story in your head of like what would
it
happen?
was me and my own story in my head about what would happen. And again, people don't actually outwardly ever come to you and go, what's going on with your tattoo? Like, it's rare that people actually come. Now, I say this, and then you look at my TikTok, like comments, and it's like plenty of people have things to say about tattoos on women. But at the time, nobody said anything. So it was literally all my internalized fear in my head of what's going to happen, what's going to happen, what's going to happen, what's going to happen. So then it became so, but it became easier to do it. And then I started wearing my hair not stupidly parted down the middle. I was like, well, let's just see what happens if I were, and nothing happened. And I was like, okay. Keep in mind, however, though, I was an independent contributor still at this stage, right? The stakes are lower. The stakes are
Yeah.
lower. And so it became, so it's an incremental thing. And I was lucky, I think, in that when I was also working at a startup, which probably also made it easier for me to kind of roll in and do these things, even if it was like 6-7 years ago. It
Yeah.
made it easier. But it was a lot of it was my own internal fear of, almost, here's how I think of it. I had been fed the story of where our value and worth comes from so much from external sources, from that I had started to believe it for myself. And so even though I had done something that felt very true and real to myself, that felt so empowering, that I have at times looked down at my skin and been like, cried, because I've never felt more comfortable in my own self than I do at this very moment. I had internalized it so much that even though I was willing to admit my own self-worth internally, I was self-sabotaging externally, because I had been told so often what my look conveyed about my worth and value in a professional corporate setting.
Yeah. And I think it's so important to reiterate that idea of the stories that we tell ourselves, whether they be positive stories or negative
Mhm.
stories. You could also be like, you could also tell yourself the story in your head of like, oh, people are gonna love this, right? It's going to be beautiful. I'm going to get so many
Right.
compliments. But whether it's positive or negative, they're all stories that we're making up. It's impossible to
Hmm.
predict the future. It's
Right.
impossible, right? So at the end of the day, we need to like put ourselves in those uncomfortable situations to get the data back to be like, oh, this is what happens if I do that. And it could be bad, but at least we can then take that and understand how can, like, we can practice and get in through therapy or through other things, understand how to have those crucial conversations with our coworkers and all those other things.
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
really interesting about those layers as far as like, I mean, shout out to like you not even doing your laundry and that being the reason.
Right. Shout out to my laundry basket. But it's just, yeah, and to me, I think it's just, it's the stories that we tell ourselves, right? And what I tell folks is so often we don't do things out of fear of what we might receive. Right. And it's what I was doing, right? I was wearing the long sleeves and the hair parted down the middle, all of that because of fear of what I might receive back and what if it's negative. But ultimately, I think what we need to remember is if we are ourselves and we show up authentically and what we get back is negative, that is actually the red flag we want to see. That is
Right, right.
actually the red flag we want. Because if us showing up as us is a problem in an environment, an office, a corporation, a club, a group, whatever, we need to know that. We actually
Mhm.
want that input because ultimately we can choose one of two things. We can choose to either change it, which is yes, go, or we can choose to remove ourselves from it, which is
Yeah.
also noble and self-care. But we can't make that decision until we know what the actual reality is. So when we shield others from our own truth for the sake of our own self-protection, what we are actually doing is potentially setting ourselves up for like sabotage, because
Yeah.
we are like self-sabotage, because we are essentially acting as imposters in our own reality, trying to get a perception and an acceptance that ultimately won't be there if we show up as ourselves. It's a big fight, like, and it's real meta, but ultimately you want to know if your true self isn't accepted, because then you can only then can you make the actual determination of if you want to stay in that space.
Exactly. Like we need those signals in order to make an informed decision. And you can't do
Correct.
that if you keep, yeah, I agree. It's interesting too, because you mentioned you mentioned TikTok, which is I would say it's kind of like a sample survey of like how the world really feels about you, right?
Mhm.
And I want to,
Goddamn, yes.
well, I want to get into both sides because as much negative comments as you get, I'm sure your DMs are flooded with like positivity as well. And it's TikTok and LinkedIn. But first, let's joke a little bit about some of the ridiculous, absurd, doesn't even make sense comments that you get
Yes.
about your appearance. And then we'll get into the positive because I think it's important to end on that.
Absolutely. I think so the way that I achieved
My
very early
favorite.
on, my favorite, it is actually, so here's the well, I could go on to we could do a whole nother podcast about how trolls are now my best friends. I deeply enjoy getting a troll comment now.
Oh, me too. It's
I
instant opportunity to make content off of it.
Yes, yeah, I'm like, yes. And my favorite thing to reply, and top tip for anybody who wants to be a content creator, is you want to know the fastest way to piss off a troll. So number one, make content out of them. But number two, say, I'm so sorry we don't see eye to eye, but thank you for the engagement. The second you say, but thank you for the engagement, I mean, you see the flames just come up. It's fantastic. But my favorite thing so the way that I rose to very unexpected, what I call minor TikTok stardom early on, was I posted a story. Like, this was my third video. I posted a story of how I got fired. Um, and the way that I got fired was it completely, by the way, unrelated to how I look, nothing. The story that I told was about how I got fired, which was being lured into a meeting under false pretenses, being fired without reason or cause. That was the story. And the point of the story was there are ways to fire people humanely and there are ways to fire people inhumanely, and you can make a choice. It's not an inevitability. And which choice are you making? That's ultimately the moral of that story. But what was incredible to me was that what happened, all the trolls, almost all the trolls that rolled in there were like, well, of course you got fired. Look at your hair. Well, of course, I'd fire you too. You have tattoos. I fired you too. Look at your ears. I have gauges, right? I have gauges. And I was like, hold on, wait a minute.
Oh, you like
I
you missed
hadn't
the complete part of the story, everything.
fully, but it was an immediate, like, well, of course you got fired. You have a shaved head. Well, how can you possibly be good at your job? You got sleeve tats. I had no idea that my ability to put together a coherent sentence was predicated on the amount of ink on my skin, right? And it's just, but that was amazing. I'm like, so, and that's where it went. And that's when I was like, holy crap, this is what a large swath of the population actually thinks. It hadn't even, like, it was interesting because I thought about that about myself, like, oh, will people take me seriously if I just, it had never actually occurred to me that a huge amount of the population is out there going, I'd fire you too. I probably wouldn't even hire you. You clearly can't do a job. Look at how you look. What? So it was, so yeah, that was, so I got my start in trolldom really early on through that. And now, but to your point, the other thing that happened, which incredibly and wonderfully has actually been much more prevalent and at a much higher percentage, have been people who have said, again, they also missed the point of the story because they weren't actually hearing the story, but they were like, oh my God, you were a VP of growth marketing at this company and you look like, oh my God. And I like, that's me. Like, I feel like oh my God, or people literally didn't even say that, like, your tattoos are beautiful, your hair is amazing. Where did you get your gauges? Like, on the other half of the coin was all of these people who are seeing themselves in me, which is again why we did the wardrobe change, because it's important to have that visibility. And yes, you're always going to have the terrible workplaces where it's like, we won't even hire you if you have tattoos. Well, good, because I don't want to work here if I can't be myself.
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
but it's an interesting microcosm of society, I think, that's even, it's more, and we can talk, I think I do want to talk about LinkedIn, and it's more curated on LinkedIn because people are just a smidge more careful, but it exists in spades there
Oh
as
yeah.
well. And it's become especially apparent because on LinkedIn, it's all about, well, are you professional? Well, are you professional? This is a professional networking site. What the hell does that even mean, Chad? What does that mean? You know, like, what, like, does professional mean that we only talk about like promotions and what? Cool, we can do that. Or what we can do is embrace the humanity of the people that are actually in the workforce, which, by the way, a lot of them look like me, look like you. Not all of them look like you, Chad. And most of us don't want to look like you. So, but yeah, I get the hate that I get there is interesting because it's much less than on TikTok. On TikTok, I get like the randomness. Like everybody just rolls in with their anonymous profile. Like, I follow 3 people, I have no videos, but here I am with my hate. On LinkedIn, it's different because people are like, they have their name, they have their profile picture, they have where they work, they have how long they've been there, and they're rolling into your comments with like hate about whatever it is that I tick a box on them for, whether it's that I am brown, whether it's that I'm queer, whether it's that I'm tattooed, and they're like, nah, I'm just pressing the gas pedal with the absolute confidence that they are right. So
Yeah.
right, in fact, that they are staking their own professional reputation
Hmm.
on these, which is wild to me. Like, holy bananas, you are writing a check, drawing from the bank of hate, and you're posting it right there for, look at my receipts. I'm hateful. What are you doing? like, why, why are you banking at the bank of bias? What are you doing?
Lack of bias. Yeah, it's wild. But I'm glad you are able to see that it's not all just hate, right? It's not all trolls. Like, there is a lot of positivity. And honestly, for me, that's what motivates me and that's what keeps me going on days when I was like, damn, do I really want to edit this episode? And then someone slided in my DM and was like, wow, I didn't know someone that looked like me could make that much money or do X, Y, and
Mm-hmm,
Z professionally, right? So
mm-hmm.
that motivates me and that keeps me going and validates that the work that I'm doing is so important, right? To end, what about you though? What inspires you to continue being your most authentic self, especially in the workplace?
knowing, because I had, to your point, I've had that verbal verification of, by existing as I am, I make space for others to feel like they can be that too. That honestly, that is it. It's just, and it's interesting. And I'll give one shout out to my current employer. So like I said, I work at Penguin Random House. You know, if you don't know what that is, it's literally the world's largest publisher. And I have an executive role there. And I look like I look. Okay. And do you know what people give a crap about when they talk to me? They give a crap about my ideas. Not once has anybody ever. In fact, I get sought out for my ideas and my brain and my contributions. I am validated and supported constantly. And I know that I am in a privileged position because most folks don't have this. I know that. But I believe that everybody should, because they deserve it. Everybody deserves to show up in a boardroom, in an office space, in a corporate space, and feel seen positively, valued, and welcomed. They deserve that. They deserve to feel how I feel. And the thing about it is, that's why I keep being visible. And that's why I'm not going to stop making noise outside of work about this, because to me, before I had this job, I always kind of was like, is what I'm asking for really existing? Like, can I actually, like, I'm fighting for systemic change in corporate America. I am fighting for inclusion. I am fighting for vulnerability and leadership. I am fighting for psychologically safe spaces where people can show up and feel seen and valued and cared for. But does that really exist, or is this just a pipe dream? And now I am in that space. I have a role in that space, a high one. And so to me, I can every time somebody tells me, no, what you're doing doesn't exist, I'm like, hold my earrings, or hold my plugs, because I can show you that it does, because I live it. And if it exists and I live it, that means it's a choice people can make, corporations can make. And if it doesn't exist, that's a choice they're making in the other direction. And do you really want to be there? Do you really want to be in an uninclusive space? But that's why, to me, that's what matters, is I will continue to show up, because my existence in a space that is as rarefied as the one that I inhabit in a corporate way gives visibility and voice and credence to the fact that we can exist, we are valued, we can be professional because of what we contribute and our skills, not because of how we look.